let's in this lesson learn about imperatives. Here is what the Hebrew imperatives look like. These are the command words if you want to give a command to someone. In Hebrew, the forms are shemor, shimri, shimru, shemorna. There are 4 forms, depending on whether you are speaking to one man, one woman, or a group of men, or a group of women. If you are giving a command to one man, you say shemor, keep. If you are giving a command to one woman, you say shimri, keep. If you are giving a command to a group of men, you say shimru. This is the masculine plural form. If you are giving a command to a group of women, you say shemorna. So again, the forms are shemor, shimri, shimru, shemorna. It happens that these imperative forms are very close to the imperfect forms. They actually are the same as the second person imperfect forms with the tav taken away. Look at the second person imperfect forms again. Tishmor, tishmari, tishmaru, tishmorna. Now just imagine taking away the tav from each form. In this way you come up with the imperative. Here's the imperative. Shemor, shimri, shimru, shemorna. Now this is also what happens with irregular verbs. The imperative is always the same as the second person imperfect with the tav taken away. Look at these forms of the verb halach, meaning to go or walk. The second person imperfect is telech, you will go. The command word or imperative is lech, go. The masculine plural imperfect is telechu, so the imperative is lechu, meaning go, spoken to a group of men. Here's another example. The second person imperfect of natan is titain, you will give. The imperative to one man is tain, give. Again, the imperative is the same as the second person imperfect with the tav taken away. The masculine plural imperfect is titanu, you will give. The imperative is tanu. There is one more form to learn in connection with the imperative. There is an alternate form for the masculine singular imperative. It is a longer form with an extra kametz he on the end. Our textbook calls this form the long imperative. It is shomra. You can see that there is a kametz he on the end, and the vowel under the first root letter is a kametz chatuf. You can think of it as the shortening of the cholim that was on the regular imperative, shomra. Now this long imperative form is usually translated the same as a regular imperative, but people who have studied it have sensed that it is usually used when the action of the verb is directed toward the speaker. It can be used, for example, when one wants to say, give to me, or come to me. It looks much like the Kal perfect form she kept, but notice that there is no meteg, so the vowel is a kametz katuf. This long imperative form is used throughout the language on many imperatives. Here, for example, is the long imperative of the verb to give, natan. The long imperative has an extra kametz he on the end, tana. Here is the long imperative of the verb zachar, which means to remember. The long imperative is zochra. Finally, in connection with imperatives, it is good to note that sometimes an extra interjection appears with imperatives, na. This particle is often translated please in English, so shimruna is keep, please. Here is another imperative with the interjection na. This is actually a long imperative that means save. This word, hoshiana, therefore means save, please. Let's today see how Hebrew says a prohibition or a negative command. First, let's be reminded of what we mean with a prohibition or negative command. Here are examples of negative commands in English. Don't keep, don't go. A prohibition is when you tell someone not to do something. In many languages, such as English, one makes a prohibition simply by adding a negative to an imperative, but this is not how Hebrew does it. Hebrew has two constructions. Neither of them uses an imperative. If in Hebrew you want to speak a strong prohibition or a permanent prohibition, if you don't want something ever to be done, you use this construction, the negative lo with a second person imperfect form. You say, lo tishmor, if you are speaking to one man. This means, don't keep, and since this is the permanent prohibition, the idea is, don't ever keep. Here is how the permanent prohibition would look if speaking to one woman or a group of men or women. To one woman, one would say, lo tishmeri. It is simply the second feminine singular imperfect with the lo. If speaking to a group of men, one would say lo tishmeru. If speaking to a group of women, one would say lo tishmorna. Now each of these expressions could also be translated as a simple sentence of fact. You will not keep. But in the right context, they could be a permanent prohibition. If one wants to speak a lighter prohibition, a prohibition, for example, that is only for the present time, one uses a different negative. The negative is al. This construction is sometimes called the immediate prohibition, which means it is for the present time, but not necessarily forever. To say don't keep now to one man, you say al tishmor. To say don't keep now to a group of men, one says al tishmeru. So one has to watch the negative closely. The negative with the long vowel lo is the negative for the long-range or permanent prohibition. This is the construction used, for example, in the Ten Commandments. The negative with the shorter vowel al is the negative used in the immediate prohibition, don't keep now. It also happens with the immediate prohibition that the verb used is technically not the imperfect, but the jussive. We will learn about the jussive in the next lesson. For now it can be said that the jussive usually looks the same as the imperfect, but sometimes with irregular verbs it is shortened. Here, for example, is the immediate prohibition, don't be. The verb is from haya, the verb to be. The form of the verb here is a shortened imperfect. This is the jussive form. It is this form that is used with the immediate prohibition. So in summary, here is the way that prohibitions are formed in Hebrew. The permanent prohibition uses the negative lo with a second person imperfect. The immediate prohibition uses the negative al with a second person jussive. In this lesson, there is also one other little point in regard to commands in Hebrew. In Hebrew, one can commonly find a construction like this, lech va'amarta. The first word here is an imperative, go, from halach. The second word is a Vav Consecutive Perfect. Literally, it could be translated, and you will say. A Vav Consecutive Perfect, however, in a construction like this, is simply following the imperative, and it could be translated like the imperative. You could translate, go and say. The rule is this. A Vav Consecutive Perfect may follow an imperative and take on the character of the imperative that preceded it. Here's another example. In Hebrew, you can say, Shim'u vishavtem. And you can translate like two imperatives, hear and live.